The slave auction block stood under the harsh lights of Station Omega-7, a grimy trading post that existed in the space between legitimate commerce and outright piracy. Captain watched from the back of the crowd, his weathered face showing no emotion as various alien species were paraded before potential buyers. His cargo ship, the Wandering Star, sat docked 3 levels below, its holds empty and his crew growing restless. He wasn't here by choice. The job had gone south on Prime when their original cargo turned out to be stolen Imperial property. Now, with creditors breathing down his neck and fuel reserves running low, found himself in places he'd sworn never to visit again. The auctioneer with green hide gestured to his next lot. Now we have something special, the last survivors of the species, young females, both of them. 2 figures were led onto the platform in chains. Felt his breath catch. They were unmistakably humanoid but ethereally beautiful, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Their hair flowed like liquid silver, and their large eyes held depths that reminded him of Earth's deepest oceans. But these 2 looked nothing like the proud warrior race he'd read about in xenobiology texts. The younger one, barely past adolescence by human standards, cowered behind her companion. Her chains rattled with each trembling movement. The older girl, perhaps in her early 20s, stood but could see the barely controlled terror in her rigid posture. Both wore the tattered remains of what had once been elegant garments, now reduced to little more than rags. "That was cleansed 6 months ago," the auctioneer continued with casual brutality. "Imperial forces left no survivors. These 2 were off-world when it happened, part of a diplomatic mission. They are, as far as we know, the last of their kind." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Recognized most of the bidders, mine owners looking for disposable labor, brothel operators seeking exotic attractions, and collectors who valued rarity above all else. None of them saw the 2 as anything more than property. "Now I must warn potential buyers," they said with a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. "These particular specimens have proven difficult. The younger one barely speaks and has violent episodes. The older one has already killed 2 handlers who got too close. They're fragile psychologically but surprisingly dangerous when cornered." Several bidders shook their heads and walked away, watched as the crowd thinned. The remaining buyers were the worst kind, those who saw broken spirits as a feature rather than a flaw. "Bidding starts at 500 credits for the pair," the auctioneer announced. The older girl's head snapped up at those words. Her eyes found in the crowd, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten. Not just fear or despair, but a fierce intelligence burning behind the terror. She was calculating, measuring, looking for any chance at survival or escape. 600, called out, a hegemony flesh trader whose reputation made skin crawl. 750, countered a thin man in an expensive suit. Recognized him as a representative of one of the core world's entertainment syndicates. The younger made a sound, something between a whimper and a growl. The older one placed herself protectively in front of her companion, her chains clinking. Even in bondage, even facing the worst fate imaginable, she was trying to shield the younger girl. Found himself stepping forward before he'd consciously made the decision. 1,000 credits, he called out. The crowd turned to look at him. He was nobody special here, just another human cargo hauler in worn spacer gear. But his bid was serious money for what most considered damaged goods. "Interesting," said, his multiple eyes focusing on. "The human thinks he can tame what others could not." Ignored the taunt, 1,200. 15, countered, his interest clearly piqued. The bidding war was brief but intense. Found himself going far beyond what he could afford, burning through credits he'd been saving for engine repairs. But every time he looked at the 2, every time he saw the older one's desperate protectiveness over her companion, he couldn't stop himself. 3,000 credits, he finally said, his voice steady despite the fact that he was bidding money he didn't have. The crowd fell silent, studied for a long moment, then shrugged. "Too rich for my blood, the human can have his exotic pets." "Sold to the human for 3,000 credits, the auctioneer declared. Felt his stomach drop as the reality of what he'd just done hit him. He'd bought 2 alien slaves with money he didn't possess, on a station where defaulting on payment was a capital offense. But when he looked at the older again, saw the mixture of hope and terror in her eyes, he knew he'd had no choice. The transaction was completed with painful efficiency. transferred what credits he had, and signed promissory notes for the rest, putting his ship up as collateral. Within an hour, he found himself in a small holding cell with his new property. The two huddled in the corner farthest from him. The younger one had her face buried against her companion's shoulder, her whole body shaking. The older one kept herself between, and the girl, her blue eyes never leaving his face. Sat down slowly, keeping his hands visible. He'd dealt with traumatized beings before, during his military service and in the years since. He knew that sudden movements or loud noises could trigger violent reactions. "My name is," he said quietly. "I know you probably don't trust me, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know that I didn't buy you to hurt you." The older said nothing, but her posture shifted slightly. She was listening. "I don't know much about your species," continued, "but I know what it's like to lose everything, to watch your world burn and be powerless to stop it." That got a reaction. The older girl's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was like music played on crystal instruments, even roughened by fear and exhaustion. "You lie," she said in accented but clear standard. "Humans have never lost there." "No," agreed, "but I've lost other things, people I cared about, futures I thought were certain." He paused. "I served in the Rim Wars. I've seen entire colonies turned to glass by orbital bombardment. I know what it looks like when hope dies." The younger lifted her head slightly, revealing a face that would have been heartbreakingly beautiful if not for the haunted look in her eyes. She whispered something in her own language, too quiet for the universal translator to pick up. The older one responded in the same language, her tone protective. Then she looked back at. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Right now, nothing. You're safe. That's all that matters." "Safe," the word came out like a bitter laugh. "We are property now, slaves. There is no safety in that." Leaned back against the wall, careful to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. "The paperwork says you belong to me now, yes. But I've never owned another sentient being, and I don't plan to start. Once we're away from this station, once you've had time to recover, you'll be free to go wherever you want." "And if we choose to stay?" the older girl asked, surprising him. "Then we'll figure it out together." She studied him for a long moment, those ocean-deep eyes seeming to look right through him. Finally, she spoke again. "I am of the Moonlit Grove clan. This is my cousin, in of the same lineage. We are—" She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "We were to be the next generation of diplomats for our people." "Were" noted gently. "Were" confirmed. "Now we are nothing, the last echoes of a silenced song." The poetry in her words, even filtered through a translator, was beautiful and heartbreaking. Felt a weight settle on his shoulders that had nothing to do with the debt he'd just taken on. "You're not nothing," he said firmly. "You're survivors, and as long as you're alive, your people aren't truly gone." In looked up at him then, and he saw something that made his breath catch. Despite everything she'd been through, despite the trauma and terror, there was still a spark of life in her eyes. Damaged, maybe, but not extinguished. "The handlers said we were broken," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Too wild to be tamed, too fragile to be useful." "Maybe they just didn't understand what they were looking at," replied. "Humans have a saying, the most beautiful flowers grow in the harshest conditions. Maybe what they saw as broken, I see as strong." His expression softened slightly. For the first time since he'd seen her on the auction block, she didn't look entirely hopeless. "You paid a great deal for us," she observed. "More than you could afford, I think." Shrugged, "Credits just numbers on a screen. Can't take it with you when you're dead." "And if you cannot pay, what happens then?" "Then I guess we'll find out together." The holding cell fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Watched the two, nodding details he'd missed before. Despite their current condition, he could see hints of what they must have been like before their world ended. Had the bearing of someone who'd been trained in diplomacy and leadership. Even now, traumatized and enslaved, she was calculating options, looking for advantages. In was younger, more damaged by their ordeal, but he caught glimpses of intelligence and curiosity in her expressions. "The auctioneer said you killed 2 handlers," said to. She straightened, defiance flickering in her eyes. "They touched without permission. I protected her as is my duty." "Good," said simply. Both looked surprised at his response. "You protected someone weaker than yourself at great personal risk," he explained. "Where I come from, we call that heroic." blinked, clearly not having expected that reaction. You are unusual for a slaver. I'm not a slaver. I'm a cargo hauler with a big mouth and a tendency to make stupid decisions when I see injustice. For the first time, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. That does sound stupid. Yeah, well, nobody ever accused me of being smart. A chime sounded through the cell's comm system. Attention buyer, came the auctioneer's voice. Your payment is due in 6 hours. Please report to the financial office to complete your transaction. The momentary lightness in the atmosphere evaporated. His eyes sharpened with understanding. You do not have the money, she stated. Not all of it, no. Then why bid? Why risk yourself for strangers? Was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, he met her gaze directly. Because someone had to. Because you were standing there ready to fight for her even though you were chained and helpless. Because I've seen what happens to people when nobody stands up for them. He paused. Because it was the right thing to do. Studied him intently. You would risk your freedom, your life, for principles. Wouldn't you? She considered that. Yes, I would, I have. Then you understand. In spoke up suddenly, her voice stronger than before. The humans who destroyed our world also spoke of principles, of order and civilization. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Felt their weight, understanding the suspicion behind them. Yeah, he said quietly. My species has a talent for justifying terrible things with pretty words. We're not the good guys in every story, that's for sure. But you are different, asked. I'm trying to be. Another long silence fell over the cell. Found himself studying the two more closely. Despite their ordeal, despite being the last of their kind, they hadn't broken completely. There was steel beneath the surface, strength that had been beaten down but not destroyed. Tell me about your world, he said suddenly. Both aliens looked startled by the request. Why? Asked suspiciously. Because in 6 hours I might be dead. And if I am, someone should remember that I met the last of and that they were magnificent. His breath caught. It made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. You want to know about Prime? In asked. If you're willing to share. The two exchanged a look, communicating in that wordless way that close family members often did. Finally began to speak. Our world had 3 moons, she said, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. They danced across our sky in patterns that changed with the seasons. The moonlit grove was my clan's territory, a forest of silver trees that sang when the wind moved through their leaves. Sang. The trees were partially crystalline, In explained, speaking more freely now. When air moved through their branches, they created music. Different groves had different songs. My clan were the keepers of the harmony between the groves, continued. We studied the patterns, learned to read the music of the world itself. It was beautiful. Could hear the loss in her voice, the grief for something that could never be recovered. What were you studying? He asked, before it happened. Replied, the art of building bridges between species. My people believed that understanding others was the key to peace. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. A species that had dedicated itself to peaceful coexistence, wiped out by those who preached order through force. And you? Asked In. She said quietly, the study of how living things create resonance with their environment. I was going to help terraform worlds, make them suitable for multiple species to coexist. Noble goals, observed. Useless now, said bitterly. There are no more worlds to terraform for my people, no more bridges to build. Maybe not for the specifically, said, but the knowledge doesn't have to die with your species. The skills you learned, the perspectives you gained, those could still help others. Both aliens looked at him with surprise. You think our knowledge has value beyond our own people? In asked. I think wisdom is wisdom, regardless of where it comes from, and I think the galaxy became a place when your world died. Was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. You speak as though we have a future beyond servitude. You do if you want it. The paperwork may say I own you, but that's just legal fiction. Your people, not property. Once we're away from here, you'll be as free as I can make you. And if we choose to go with you, to work on your ship, considered that, then I guess we'd be crew together, equal partners. You would trust us with your ship, your life. You've already shown me what kind of people you are. You put yourself between danger and someone weaker, even when you were powerless. You're still thinking about helping others even after everything you've been through. Yeah, I'd trust you with my life. The two exchanged another look, this one longer and more complex. Finally spoke. If we survive the next 6 hours, she said carefully, and if your offer of freedom is genuine, then yes, we would like to join your crew. Why? Asked, genuinely curious. Because you are the first being in 6 months to see us as people rather than objects, In said simply, and because we have nowhere else to go. There's more to it than that, added. Our people believed in balance, in harmony between different elements. You represent something we thought was extinct in this galaxy. Honor, perhaps, or simple decency. Felt heat rise in his cheeks. I'm not some paragon of virtue. I'm just a guy who couldn't walk away from a bad situation. Sometimes that is enough, said softly. A new voice came through the comm system, different from the auctioneer. Attention all station personnel. We have incoming Imperial Navy vessels. All ships are to remain docked until further notice. Felt ice in his veins. Imperial Navy meant trouble, especially on a station like Omega-7 that existed in legal gray areas. But more than that, it meant his time had just run out. If the Imperials were conducting an inspection, they'd freeze all financial transactions until it was complete. That complicates things, he said with forced calm. His expression had gone hard. Imperials, they may have come for us. What do you mean? We are evidence, In explained, her voice tight with fear. Evidence that some escaped their purge. They cannot allow that to be known. Felt pieces clicking into place. The systematic destruction of an entire species. The fact that these two had been the only survivors found. The convenient timing of an Imperial inspection. They're not here for a routine check, he realized. They're here to tie up loose ends. Nodded grimly. If they find us, we will disappear. Our deaths will be quiet and unrecorded. And anyone associated with us will likely disappear too, In added, looking at with something that might have been pity. You should not have helped us. Now you will die for it. Stood up, his mind racing through possibilities. The station was locked down. His ship was docked 3 levels below, and he had 2 traumatized aliens who were wanted dead by one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Well, he said, managing a grin that felt only slightly forced, I've been in worse situations. When? Asked skeptically. Thought about it. Okay, maybe not worse, but definitely more boring. Despite everything, In let out a sound that might have been a laugh. You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, but right now that might be exactly what we need. He moved to the cell's door and pressed his ear against the metal. He could hear increased activity in the corridors beyond, the sound of boots and raised voices. The Imperial forces were moving fast, conducting a thorough sweep of the station. How long before they reach the holding cells? Asked. Not long enough, replied. He turned back to them, his expression serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you fight? Straightened, yes. I mean really fight, not just defending against grabby handlers, but actual combat, life or death. My people were diplomats, but we were not pacifists, she replied. All learned the warrior's path as well as the scholars. It was part of our balance philosophy. And you? He asked in. The younger looked uncertain. I have the training, but I have never killed. Neither had I until I had to, said gently. The question is, can you do what's necessary to protect yourself? And In was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I think so. Good, because we're about to find out. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside, getting closer. Moved to the cell's control panel, studying the lock mechanism. It was a standard electromagnetic system, nothing too sophisticated for a holding cell. What are you doing? Asked. Getting us out of here. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket. One advantage of being a cargo hauler, you learn to fix things that break at inconvenient times. He began working on the panel's access port. After a few tense minutes, the lock disengaged with a soft click. How did you? In began. Trade secret, said with a slight smile. Now here's the plan. We need to get to my ship, but the docking bay is 3 levels down and crawling with Imperials. We're going to have to be smart about this. And if we are caught? Asked. Met her eyes, then we make them work for it. The corridor outside was dimly lit and currently empty, but they could hear activity echoing from other parts of the station. Led the way, moving as quietly as possible while the two followed. Despite their recent ordeal, they moved with a grace that spoke of their diplomatic training and natural athleticism. They made it 2 levels down before they encountered their first patrol. 3 Imperial Marines in full combat armor rounded a corner just as was checking the stairwell access. For a moment, everyone froze in surprise. Then all hell broke loose. The lead Marine reached for his weapon, but was already moving. Years of military training kicked in, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. He tackled the soldier, driving him into the wall hard enough to dent the metal plating. Behind him, he heard cry out something in her own language. There was a sound like crystal wind chimes, and one of the other Marines stumbled backward, clutching his helmet. It moved with surprising speed, her foot connecting with the third Marine's knee joint in exactly the right spot to disable the armor's servos. The fight was brief but vicious. When it was over, 3 Imperial Marines lay unconscious on the deck and was looking at his 2 companions with new respect. "Remind me never to underestimate warrior training," he said, breathing hard. Was examining one of the Marines' weapons, her expression grim. "They are equipped for capture, not kill. They want us alive." "For now," In added darkly. Nodded, which means we have a small advantage. They'll hesitate to use lethal force, at least until they have no choice. They quickly stripped the Marines of useful equipment and continued toward the docking bay. The station's lockdown meant that most civilian traffic had been cleared from the corridors, but it also meant that any movement they encountered was likely to be hostile. As they descended the final stairwell, could hear the sounds of ships being searched above them. The Imperials were being thorough, checking every vessel on the station. It was only a matter of time before they reached the wandering star. "There," whispered, pointing through a small window in the stairwell door. His ship sat in docking bay 7, looking small and unremarkable among the larger vessels, but he could see Imperial Marines stationed near the airlock. Guards observed unnecessarily. "How many crew does your ship carry?" In asked. "Just me usually. Sometimes I pick up temporary help for big jobs." "So if we can reach it, then we can fly out of here, assuming they haven't disabled the engines or planted bombs." Studied the layout of the docking bay through the window. 4 guards that I can see, possibly more out of sight. "Standard sweep pattern," noted, watching their movement. "They're being careful but not overly paranoid. They probably think we're still locked up." "What is your ship's capability?" asked. "She's not a warship, but she's fast and maneuverable. Modified cargo hauler with some unofficial upgrades. Weapons. Some, enough to discourage pirates, maybe not enough to fight our way past a naval blockade." In was studying the docking bay's environmental systems through another window. "The atmosphere processors," she said suddenly. "What about them? If someone were to cause a malfunction in the main intake, it would trigger emergency protocols. Containment fields, automated systems coming online, general chaos." Looked at her with interest. "You can do that?" Includes understanding how living systems interact with technological ones. Atmosphere processors are essentially artificial lungs, and lungs can be made to cough. "Do it." In moved to an access panel, her hands dancing over the controls with surprising confidence. Within moments, alarms began blaring throughout the docking bay. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red, and containment fields began cycling up and down as the automated systems tried to compensate for what they perceived as a massive contamination event. In the confusion, the Imperial Guards found themselves dealing with panicked civilians, emergency protocols, and general chaos. And slipped through the mayhem like ghosts, reaching the wandering star just as the guards were called away to deal with what appeared to be a reactor leak in another section of the bay. "Nice work," said as they boarded his ship. "It will not fool them for long," In replied, but she looked pleased with herself. Led them quickly to the bridge, his hands flying over the startup sequence. The wandering star came to life around them, engines humming with barely contained power. "Strap in," he warned. "This is going to be interesting." As the ship lifted off its docking clamps, could see Imperial vessels moving to intercept. 3 light cruisers and a destroyer, all moving to block the station's exit vectors. "They're hailing us," reported from the communications station. "Ignore them. The destroyer is powering weapons." "Of course it is." Push the engines to full power, angling toward what looked like the smallest gap in the Imperial formation. The Wandering Star might not be a warship, but she was built for speed, and he'd made some modifications over the years that weren't exactly legal. "Warning shots," he announced as energy beams streaked past their hull. "They're not trying to destroy us," In observed. "Yet, but that'll change once they realize we're not stopping." The ship shuddered as a beam grazed their shields. Threw the ship into a diving spiral, using the station's bulk as cover while he built up speed for the jump to hyperspace. "Jump coordinates laid in," reported. She'd taken to the navigation systems like she'd been born to them. "Where are we going?" In asked. "Anywhere but here," replied, pushing the engines past their safety margins. Another beam struck them, this one more solid. Sparks flew from several consoles and the lights flickered. "Shields at 60%, reported. "Almost there," muttered, watching the jump drive charge. "Come on, come on." The destroyer had moved to cut off their escape route, its massive bulk looming ahead of them. Could see its main guns rotating to target them directly. "They're going to fire," In said, her voice tight with fear. "Not if I can help it." Activated one of his ship's more creative modifications. Instead of trying to outrun the destroyer, he flew straight at it, accelerating to ramming speed. At the last possible second, he activated the emergency jump drive. The Wandering Star disappeared into hyperspace just as the destroyer's main guns fired, leaving the Imperial fleet shooting at empty space. In the sudden quiet of hyperspace, the three survivors sat in stunned silence for a moment. "We made it," In said, sounding surprised. "We made it," agreed. Was studying the navigation display. "Where are we going?" Checked their heading. "New Geneva. It's a free port, no Imperial jurisdiction. We can lie low there while we figure out our next move." And then looked at his two new crew members, these last survivors of a murdered world who had somehow ended up as his responsibility, and he was beginning to realize his friends. "Then we figure out what comes next," he said, "together." The ship flew on through hyperspace, carrying its unlikely crew toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The Wandering Star dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Geneva system, its hull from their escape, but intact. Ran a quick diagnostic while monitored long-range sensors and worked at the engineering station, having shown an intuitive understanding of the ship's systems that impressed even him. "No pursuit," reported, her voice carrying a note of relief. "They'll be looking for us," warned. "But New Geneva doesn't cooperate with Imperial warrants unless they absolutely have to." 3 days had passed since their escape from Station Omega-7. 3 days during which had watched his two passengers slowly transform from traumatized refugees into something approaching his equals. Had thrown herself into learning the ship's systems with the dedication of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival. Had spent hours in the engineering sections, her training allowing her to understand the ship's living systems in ways that amazed. But it was the small moments that really showed their recovery. Occasional smile when she mastered a new system. In's questions about human customs and history. The way they'd begun to move through the ship as if it was home rather than just refuge. "New Geneva Control, this is cargo hauler Wandering Star requesting docking clearance." Transmitted as they approached the massive space station that served as the system's primary port. "Wandering Star, you're cleared for docking Bay 94. Be advised, there's an Imperial diplomatic vessel in system. Keep your distance and follow standard protocols." Felt his crew's tension spike at the mention of Imperial presence. "Diplomatic vessel," he said thoughtfully. "Not military, that's something at least." "Still dangerous for us," pointed out. "True, but New Geneva has strict neutrality laws. As long as we don't cause trouble, even the Imperials can't touch us here." The station was a marvel of engineering. A gleaming wheel of metal and composite that housed nearly 2 million beings from dozens of species. Unlike the grim frontier atmosphere of Omega-7, New Geneva buzzed with legitimate commerce and cultural exchange. It was, reflected, probably what the galaxy could be if people weren't so intent on conquering each other. They docked without incident, and began the process of securing birth permits and arranging for supplies. The wandering star needed repairs from their hasty escape, and his crew needed rest. "Stay close to the ship," he warned, and in. "New Geneva is safe, but it's also full of information brokers and bounty hunters. Word of your survival could bring unwanted attention." "We understand," replied, "but we cannot remain hidden forever. What kind of life is that?" It was a question that had been bothering him for days. He'd promised them freedom, but what did freedom mean for the last survivors of a dead species? Where could they go? What could they do? "I've been thinking about that," he said. "There are colonies on the rim, places where the imperial writ doesn't run, independent worlds where you could start over." "Start over as what?" In asked. "We are diplomats and scientists without a people to represent or a world to study. Our knowledge, our skills, they all centered around thee and our home." Was quiet for a moment, considering. Then an idea began to form. "Maybe that's exactly what makes you valuable," he said slowly. Both looked at him questioningly. "Think about it. You're trained diplomats who understand multiple species. You're scientists with knowledge of biological and environmental systems that could benefit any number of colonies. And more than that, you're living proof that the imperial doctrine of necessary cleansing is just genocide with a prettier name." His eyes widened. "You're suggesting we become symbols." "I'm suggesting you become what you were trained to be. Bridges between species. Teachers. Diplomats working for a cause bigger than any one world." "The resistance," In said quietly, nodded. "There are worlds out there fighting imperial expansion. Not through military action. They don't have the firepower for that, but through diplomacy, trade alliances, cultural exchange. The things your people specialized in." "You want us to help forge an alliance against the Empire," said, her voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I want you to do what you think is right. But yes, I think your skills and knowledge could help a lot of people." They were interrupted by a chime from the ship's communication system. Frowned, they weren't expecting any calls. "Incoming transmission," the ship's computer announced. "Source, New Geneva Port Authority, priority high." Accepted the transmission, and a hologram of a middle-aged human woman in Port Authority uniform appeared in the bridge. "Captain, I'm Administrator Sarah. I need to speak with you immediately regarding your passengers." Ice formed in stomach. "I don't know what you mean." "Captain, please. We're not Imperial agents, and this conversation is being conducted on a secured channel. I have information that could be vital to the safety of the survivors you're harboring." Exchanged glances with and in. The administrator had used their species name specifically, which meant she knew exactly who they were. "We'll be right there," said after a moment. Administrator's office was located in the station's central hub, with vast windows overlooking the docking bays below. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed very little. When they entered, she gestured for them to sit, her gaze lingering on the two with something that looked like reverence. "I never thought I'd see your people again," she said to them directly. "I was on station when your diplomatic mission passed through 2 years ago. Your delegation's presentation on interspecies harmony was inspiring." "You were there?" asked, surprised. "I was junior administrator then. Your people's approach to diplomacy influenced a lot of our policies here on New Geneva." She paused. "I was also there when the news of your destruction came through. I'm sorry. The galaxy is for that loss." "Thank you," In said quietly. "Now," continued, "I need to tell you something that could save your lives. The Imperial diplomatic vessel that's currently in system, it's not here for routine business. They're conducting what they call a heritage verification mission." "Which means," asked, "they're hunting for survivors. Specifically, they're following up on reports of 2 females who were sold at a slave auction on Station Omega 7. And exchanged worried glances. "How do you know this?" asked. "Because they approached me directly, offered a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of any surviving." His expression hardened. "I told them that New Geneva doesn't traffic in bounties on sentient beings." "But others might not be so principled," observed. "Exactly, which is why I'm warning you. There are already whispers in the information networks. People know you're here." Felt the walls closing in. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less. The Imperials can't act directly on New Geneva, but they have unofficial assets. Bounty hunters, mercenaries, criminals who owe them favors. Then we need to leave, In said. No, said firmly. Running will only make you easier targets. What you need is legitimacy, legal protection that even the Empire has to respect. Such as, asked. Smiled, diplomatic immunity. She activated a holographic display that showed legal documents and official seals. New Geneva is an independent system with full diplomatic recognition from 17 different stellar governments, she explained. We have the legal authority to grant asylum to political refugees and even to recognize new diplomatic entities. You're talking about making them official diplomats, realized. I'm talking about something more ambitious than that. Turned to face the two directly. Ladies, how would you feel about becoming the official representatives of the government in exile? The room fell silent, and In looked stunned. There is no government, said slowly. Our people are gone. But you're not, pointed out. And under interstellar law, as long as even one citizen of a nation survives, that nation continues to exist legally. You could form a government in exile, seek recognition from non-imperial systems, and work to preserve your people's legacy. It would be symbolic at best, In said. Symbols have power, interjected. Look at what the Empire is willing to do to eliminate you. They understand the power of symbols too. Nodded, exactly. And once you have diplomatic status, you'll have legal protections that extend throughout the civilized galaxy. The Empire might ignore a lot of laws, but they're careful about diplomatic immunity. Too many of their own people depend on it. What would this mean in practical terms? Asked. It means you'd be untouchable by imperial forces in any system that recognizes New Geneva's authority. It means you'd have official standing to speak for your people's interests. And it means you'd have the legal framework to do exactly what Captain suggested work with other systems to build opposition to imperial expansion. You're offering to make us a legitimate threat to the Empire, said thoughtfully. I'm offering to give you the tools to make yourselves into whatever you choose to become. Watched the two consider the proposal. He could see the wheels turning in their minds, the diplomats' training asserting itself as they calculated possibilities and risks. There would be conditions, In said. Of course, New Geneva would expect you to conduct yourselves according to diplomatic protocols. No terrorism, no violence against civilians, no actions that would compromise our neutrality. We would never, began hotly. I know, said gently, but I have to state it officially. The point is, this gives you a way to fight back that doesn't require you to become something you're not. How long would it take to process the paperwork? Asked. If you agree now, 2 hours. I've already prepared the documents pending your consent. An alarm chimed through the office's communication system. Checked her displays, her expression growing grim. What is it? Asked. 3 ships just undocked from the civilian levels. Configuration matches known bounty hunter vessels. They're heading for your docking bay. Was already moving. We need to get back to the ship. Wait, said. Sign the documents first. Once you're official diplomats, even bounty hunters will think twice about touching you. And if the paperwork isn't enough to stop them, then at least your deaths will create a diplomatic incident that could bring serious consequences for the Empire. Comforting, said dryly. Looked at In and something passed between them. Then she turned to. We accept, she said formally. The people, through their surviving representatives, accept New Geneva's offer of diplomatic recognition. The next few minutes were a blur of digital signatures, official seals, and legal formalities. By the time they were done, and held diplomatic credentials that officially recognized them as the ambassador and deputy ambassador to New Geneva, with full diplomatic immunity and the right to represent their people's interests throughout the galaxy. Now, said as she handed them their credentials, let's get you back to your ship before. The office's communication system crackled to life. Administrator, this is Security Chief Martinez. We have a situation in Docking Bay 94. Armed individuals are attempting to breach a civilian vessel. The Wandering Star, said grimly. On our way, replied. She turned to and the two. Security will escort you. Once you're aboard your ship, you'll have full diplomatic protection. They moved quickly through the station's corridors, flanked by New Geneva security officers. Could hear weapon fire echoing from the direction of the docking bays, and his jaw tightened. The wandering star wasn't just his ship, it was his home, and now someone was trying to take it from him. They reached the docking bay to find chaos. Three groups of armed mercenaries were attempting to breach the wandering star's hull using cutting tools, while station security had them pinned down behind cargo containers. The ship's automated defenses were active, filling the air with defensive fire, but knew they wouldn't hold forever. "Attention, mercenaries," came a voice over the bay's communication system. "This is Security Chief Martinez. You are in violation of New Geneva neutrality laws. Stand down immediately or face the consequences." One of the mercenaries, with cybernetic implants, called back. "We're operating under Imperial authority. Stand aside and let us complete our mission." "Negative. No Imperial authority is recognized in this system." Studied the tactical situation. The mercenaries were well-equipped and positioned, but they were also trapped in the docking bay with limited escape routes. If he could get to his ship, he might be able to turn the tables. "I need to reach the Wandering Star," he said to. "Too dangerous. My security team can handle this." "No offense, but your people are security guards. These are professional killers, and that's my ship they're attacking." Stepped forward. "We're coming with you." "Absolutely not. You have diplomatic immunity now, but that only works if you're not actively involved in combat." "You risked your life for us," In said firmly. "Now we return the favor." Before could argue further, the ship's defensive systems began to falter. One of the cutting teams had breached the outer hull and was working on the inner airlock. "That's it," said. "I'm going." He broke from the security perimeter before anyone could stop him, sprinting across the open bay toward his ship. Behind him, he heard curse in her own language, followed by the sound of running feet. The two had followed him, despite the danger. Reached the first group of mercenaries before they realized he was coming. His military training kicked in, muscle memory guiding his movements as he disarmed one attacker and used the man's own weapon against his companions. Beside him, moved with deadly grace, her diplomatic training apparently including more combat skills than she'd initially let on. Meanwhile, had found her way to one of the bay's environmental control panels. Within moments, the artificial gravity in the section where the second mercenary team was positioned began fluctuating wildly, sending them tumbling through the air in confusion. "Nice work," called as he fought his way toward the ship's airlock. The lead mercenary, the cybernetically enhanced, intercepted him just short of his goal. The alien was fast, strong, and experienced, but had something he didn't. He was fighting for his home and his friends. The battle was brief but vicious. When it was over, the lay unconscious on the deck and was bleeding from several cuts but still standing. Called, "More ships incoming." He looked up to see 3 more vessels approaching the station, their configuration clearly military despite the civilian markings. Imperial assets, he realized. They're escalating. Station security was moving to secure the remaining mercenaries, but knew this was far from over. The Empire had decided that the survivors were worth a major incident, which meant they weren't going to stop with a few hired guns. His voice came over the bay's communication system. "All civilians to emergency stations. We have unidentified vessels approaching without clearance." And boarded the Wandering Star quickly. The ship systems came online as ran through emergency startup procedures. "Damage report," he called. "Hull breach on Deck 3, but it's sealed," In reported from the engineering station. "Weapon systems are online, shields at full power." "The incoming ships are hailing us," announced from communications. "They're demanding we surrender the stolen Imperial property aboard our vessel." "Tell them to take it up with the New Geneva Diplomatic Corps," replied. "You're official ambassadors now." The response came quickly and wasn't diplomatic. "They're powering weapons," reported. Felt a cold smile cross his face. Big mistake. They just committed an act of war against a neutral system. As if in response to his words, New Geneva's defensive platforms came online. The space around the station suddenly filled with warning shots as the system's defense grid targeted the Imperial vessels. "This is New Geneva control to unidentified vessels," came a broadcast on all frequencies. "You have violated our neutrality and threatened our diplomatic personnel. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." One of the Imperial ships, apparently thinking it could intimidate the station into compliance, fired a direct shot at the wandering star. The beam was intercepted by the station's shields, but the message was clear. New Geneva's response was swift and decisive. Defense platforms that had been holding back now opened fire with full power, their targeting systems guided by decades of experience dealing with pirates and raiders. Within minutes, 2 of the 3 Imperial vessels were disabled, their hulls venting atmosphere and their weapons offline. The third ship, apparently realizing the situation had gone beyond salvageable, jumped to hyperspace. In the aftermath, as emergency crews worked to repair damage and security teams processed prisoners, found himself in his office again, along with his 2 crew members. "Well," the administrator said, "that was more excitement than we usually see in a month." "I'm sorry we brought this trouble to your station," said. "Don't be, this was bound to happen eventually. The Empire's been pushing boundaries for months, testing our resolve. Today they found out that New Geneva takes its neutrality seriously." "What happens now?" asked. Now you're free to go wherever you choose. Your diplomatic credentials are recognized throughout non-imperial space, which gives you a lot of options. And the Empire will think twice before testing us again, but they won't give up on hunting you. If anything, this incident will make them more determined. Looked at and in, still want to take the fight to them. More than ever, replied. They destroyed our world, enslaved us, and now they've declared war on anyone who would help us. It's time to show them that they are not so easily erased. Where do we start? In asked. Called up a star chart on the office's holographic display. There's a system called Haven's End, about 3 days from here. Independent colony, good defensive position, and they've been looking for help organizing resistance against Imperial expansion. Sounds perfect, said. It won't be easy, warned. Building alliances, coordinating resistance efforts, staying one step ahead of Imperial agents, it's dangerous work. We are the last of our people, In said quietly. If we do not fight for what we believe in, then the truly are extinct. Smiled, spoken like true diplomats. New Geneva will provide whatever support we can, but discreetly. We can't afford to be seen as actively supporting the resistance. Understood, said, and thank you for everything. Thank you, replied. Today you reminded us why we fight to stay free. 2 hours later, the wandering star undocked from New Geneva, its cargo hold filled with supplies and its crew ready for whatever came next. As they cleared the station's mass shadow and prepared to jump to hyperspace, looked at his 2 companions. Any regrets, he asked. About becoming diplomats again, about fighting the Empire, about joining your crew, smiled. No regrets, for the first time since our world died we have purpose again. And hope, In added. The Empire thinks they can erase people from history, but they're wrong. As long as we're alive, as long as we fight, they'll live on. Engage the hyperdrive, and the ship leaped into the swirling tunnel of hyperspace, carrying its crew toward their next adventure and the growing resistance movement that would soon learn the value of having the galaxy's most unlikely diplomats on their side. Behind them, New Geneva returned to its normal rhythm of commerce and cultural exchange, but with a new sense of purpose. Word of the station's defense of the survivors would spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring others and sending a clear message to the Empire. There were still those willing to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The war for the galaxy's soul had begun, and it would be fought not with battleships and armies, but with hope, determination, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to surrender to tyranny. 6 months after their escape from Station Omega-7, the wandering star approached the nebula, its hull bearing the scars of a dozen close calls and its crew hardened by experience. Checked the long-range sensors while coordinated with their contact on the hidden base they were approaching, and monitored the ship's modified systems that now included some of the most advanced stealth technology in the galaxy. The resistance had grown beyond anyone's expectations, and the 2 had become its most effective diplomatic assets. Their official status as government-in-exile representatives gave them access to neutral worlds and independent systems that had previously been reluctant to oppose imperial expansion. More importantly, their story, the last survivors of a genocided species fighting to prevent others from suffering the same fate, had become a rallying cry across dozens of worlds. Clearance confirmed, announced from the communications station. We're cleared for docking at Shadow Base. The base was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid deep in the nebula, invisible to Imperial sensors and accessible only through a maze of gravitational anomalies that would tear apart any ship that didn't know the exact route. It had become the unofficial headquarters of what the Empire now called the Independent Systems Alliance, a loose confederation of worlds, colonies, and resistance cells that had united under a single cause: freedom from Imperial rule. As they docked, marveled at how much had changed. Shadow Base hummed with activity ships from dozens of different worlds, beings from hundreds of species, all working together toward a common goal. At the center of it all were his two crew members, the former slaves who had become the galaxy's most unlikely ambassadors. "Ambassador," called a familiar voice as they disembarked. Colonel Sarah, formerly of the Earth Defense Force and now military coordinator for the Alliance, strode toward them with a broad smile. "Right on time. The Council's been waiting for your report." Had grown into her role as the ambassador with remarkable grace. Gone was the terrified refugee had first met on the auction block, replaced by a confident diplomat whose reputation for fairness and wisdom had earned respect across the galaxy. She wore simple but elegant robes that somehow managed to be both practical and ceremonial, and when she spoke, people listened. "Colonel," replied warmly, "I trust the preparations are going well." "Better than we dared hope. 17 systems have confirmed their participation in the joint declaration, if your mission to the Republic was successful." "It was," In said, joining the conversation. The younger had also transformed over the past months, her trauma gradually healing as she found new purpose in her scientific work. She now served as the Alliance's chief technology coordinator, applying her knowledge to everything from improved life support systems to breakthrough communication technologies. They have agreed to provide sanctuary for refugee populations from contested worlds. "Excellent," said. "That gives us 20 systems total, the largest independent alliance in galactic history." They made their way through the base's corridors toward the central command center, noted the changes that had occurred even in the few weeks they'd been away. New sections had been carved out of the asteroid's interior, new workshops hummed with activity, and everywhere he looked, beings from different species worked side by side on projects that would have been impossible without the kind of cooperation the Alliance had fostered. "How's the mood among the member worlds?" asked. "Cautiously optimistic," replied. "The Empire's been pulling back from border systems, consolidating their forces. Our intelligence suggests they're planning something big, but we're not sure what." "They're scared," said with quiet confidence. "For the first time in decades, they're facing organized opposition that they can't simply crush with military force. They're having to actually think about strategy." The command center was a vast cavern filled with holographic displays showing everything from troop movements to trade routes to diplomatic communications. At the center of it all stood a conference table where the Alliance Council held its meetings. Representatives from 20 different worlds, species that had been enemies for centuries, now working together because two survivors of genocide had shown them that cooperation was possible. "Ah, our wandering diplomats return," called out Administrator, no relation to, despite the name, the elected representative from the Tau colonies. "Please tell us you have good news from the Republic." Took her place at the council table with the easy confidence that had made her the Alliance's most effective negotiator. "The Republic has officially joined the Alliance," she announced. "Full membership with military cooperation agreements and open borders for refugees." A cheer went up from around the table. The Republic was one of the largest independent governments in the galaxy, with advanced technology and a strong defensive fleet. Their membership in the Alliance represented a major shift in the balance of power. "What convinced them?" asked the representative from the Hive worlds. "The truth," In replied simply. "We showed them evidence of the Empire's systematic destruction of entire species, not just but 6 others over the past century. Races that were wiped out so thoroughly that most people don't even remember they existed." The council fell silent at that revelation. It was one thing to know abstractly that the Empire was oppressive. It was another to confront the reality of genocide on such a scale. 6 species, Administrator said quietly. "How did we not know?" "Because the Empire is very good at rewriting history," said, speaking up from his position at the edge of the room. "They don't just kill people, they erase them from the record, make it as if they never existed." Which is why our work here is so important, added. We're not just fighting for independence. We're fighting to preserve the memory of those who came before us and to protect those who come after. Admiral, a reptilian being whose people had suffered under imperial rule for generations, leaned forward. What of our military preparations? The Empire won't be content to let us organize indefinitely. Our intelligence suggests you're right, said, activating a holographic display that showed Imperial fleet movements. They're massing forces in the Sigma Draconis sector, 3 full battle groups plus support vessels. Targeting, asked. Unknown, but our analysis suggests they're preparing for a decisive strike. Not against our military installations, those are too well hidden, against our civilian populations. A chill fell over the room. The Alliance's strength lay in its diversity and the support of its member populations. If the Empire could terrorize civilian worlds into withdrawing from the Alliance, they could break the Confederation without ever finding the hidden military bases. We need to accelerate our timeline, said. The joint declaration of independence was planned for next month, but we may need to move it up. To when? Admiral asked. Tomorrow. The room erupted in surprised voices, but raised her hand for silence. Think about it, she said. The Empire is planning to attack civilian targets to break our alliance before it can officially form. But if we declare independence first, make it official, then any attack on our worlds becomes an act of war against a legitimate government. That changes the political calculus significantly. She's right, said Doctor, the representative from the academic worlds. There are dozens of neutral systems that have been sitting on the fence. An unprovoked imperial attack on a legally recognized government could push them to our side. But are we ready? Administrator asked. The declaration was supposed to be the culmination of months of preparation. We'll never be completely ready, said, surprised to find himself speaking to the council. But sometimes you have to trust that the cause is right and the people are willing. Smiled at him, then looked around the table, all in favor of accelerating the timeline. One by one, hands, claws, tentacles, and other appendages rose around the table. When the vote was counted, it was unanimous. Then it's settled, announced. Tomorrow, the Independent Systems Alliance officially declares its existence to the galaxy. The next 18 hours were a blur of activity. Communications went out to every member world, announcing the accelerated timeline. Diplomatic messages were prepared for neutral systems and potential allies. Military commanders finalized defensive positions, and at the center of it all, and in worked tirelessly to coordinate the thousands of details that would make the declaration possible. Found himself with an unusual role. He was to be the human representative at the declaration ceremony. Not because he was particularly qualified, but because he was the human who had first recognized the worth of the 2 survivors. The symbolism, had explained, was important. Nervous, she asked him as they prepared for the ceremony. Terrified, he admitted. I'm a cargo hauler, not a diplomat. You're the human who saved the last of the, In said softly. That makes you exactly the right person to represent your species. The ceremony itself was held in the main assembly hall, a vast chamber that had been carved from the asteroid's core and filled with representatives from dozens of worlds. Holographic projectors allowed billions of beings across the Alliance to participate virtually, while hidden transmitters broadcast the proceedings to neutral worlds throughout the galaxy. Stood at the podium, her silver hair catching the light as she looked out over the assembled representatives. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the chamber and across the stars. 6 months ago, she began, I stood on a slave auction block, the last of my people, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Today, I stand before you as the ambassador of the government-in-exile, proud member of the Independent Systems Alliance. She paused, letting the significance of that transformation sink in. But this is not just my story. It is the story of all of us. Every being in this alliance, every world that has joined our cause, has made the choice to stand up for what is right rather than submit to what is convenient. The camera feeds showed similar scenes playing out across dozens of worlds' crowds gathered in public squares. Families huddled around communication devices. Entire populations watching as their representatives made history. For too long, continued, the galaxy has accepted that might makes right, that stronger species have the authority to dominate weaker ones. that empires can expand and consume without limit, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Today, we say no more. A cheer went up from the assembly hall, echoed by billions of voices across the Alliance worlds. Today, we formally declare the existence of the Independent Systems Alliance, a confederation of free worlds bound together not by conquest or coercion, but by shared values and mutual respect. We declare our right to self-determination, our commitment to protecting the weak, and our intention to preserve the beautiful diversity of life in this galaxy. Admiral stepped forward, representing the military aspects of the Alliance. We do not seek war, but we will not shrink from it if forced to defend ourselves. We call upon all civilized beings to recognize our sovereignty and to join us in building a future based on cooperation rather than domination. One by one, the representatives of each member world stepped forward to sign the declaration. Humans, hive world, reptilian species, crystalline beings, energy-based life forms, a rainbow of diversity united by common cause. When it came time for the final signature, gestured for to join her at the podium. The Independent Systems Alliance exists because one human being chose to see worth where others saw only broken property, she announced. Captain, would you do us the honor of the final signature? Felt every eye in the galaxy on him as he stepped forward. His hand shook slightly as he signed his name to the document that would reshape galactic politics. But as he looked out over the assembly, as he saw the hope and determination in faces from dozens of different species, he knew they were doing the right thing. Citizens of the galaxy, said as the ceremony concluded, today marks the beginning of a new age. An age where the strong protect the weak, where diversity is celebrated rather than feared, and where no species will ever again face extinction at the hands of those who see difference as a threat. The transmission ended, but the real work was just beginning. Within hours, responses began pouring in from across the galaxy. Some neutral systems announced their intention to recognize the Alliance. Others pledged support and resources. But most ominously, the Empire's response was swift and predictable. Imperial fleet movements confirmed, Admiral announced grimly. 3 battle groups have changed course. They're heading for Swirled. Felt his blood run cold. Swirled was one of the Alliance's members, a peaceful agricultural colony with minimal defenses. It was also home to nearly 50 million civilians. Estimated time to arrival? Asked. 36 hours. Can we evacuate? Not 50 million people, not in that time frame. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. The Empire's response to the Alliance's declaration was to target the most vulnerable member world, knowing that the Alliance couldn't possibly defend every system simultaneously. They're trying to break us before we can properly organize, said quietly. Show the other worlds what happens to those who defy the Empire. It's exactly what we expected, said. The question is, what do we do about it? Admiral activated the tactical display. Our fastest ships could reach Swirled in 40 hours. Too late to prevent the attack, but we might be able to limit the damage. No, In said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of excitement. We don't need to prevent the attack. We need to make sure the galaxy sees it. Everyone looked at her questioningly. Think about it, she continued. The Empire is about to commit genocide against a peaceful agricultural world in full view of the galactic community. If we can document the attack, broadcast it live to every neutral system. It would be the greatest recruitment tool the Alliance could ask for, finished, understanding immediately. Nothing would turn neutral worlds against the Empire faster than watching them murder 50 million innocent civilians. You're talking about sacrificing Swirled, Administrator said, horrified. No, replied firmly. The Empire has already made that choice, but we can make sure their sacrifice isn't meaningless. The next 30 hours were a frenzy of activity. Hidden communication relays were activated throughout neutral space. Camera platforms were deployed at the edge of the system. And most importantly, diplomatic messages went out to every major government in the galaxy, announcing that the Alliance would be providing live coverage of the Empire's response to their declaration of independence. Found himself aboard the Wandering Star once again, this time leading a small fleet of Alliance vessels towards Swirled. They wouldn't arrive in time to prevent the attack, but they would be there to document it and to rescue whatever survivors they could find. Sensor contact, in announced from her position at the ship's science station. Imperial battle group right on schedule. The holographic display showed 3 massive Imperial dreadnoughts approaching Swirled, their weapons systems charging. Smaller escort vessels spread out in attack formation, preparing for what the Empire undoubtedly saw as a routine punishment operation. "Are we broadcasting?" asked. "Galaxy-wide transmission active," confirmed from the communications station. 17 billion viewers across 43 star systems. On Swirled below, the population was doing what they could to prepare. Civilians had been evacuated to underground shelters, though everyone knew they wouldn't provide much protection against orbital bombardment. The planet's small defense force had taken up positions, knowing they were hopelessly but determined to make a stand anyway. The lead Imperial dreadnought, the Imperator's Will, hailed the planet directly. "This is Admiral Vex of the Imperial Navy," came a cold voice over the communication system. "The world of